G'day, I'm Tim Thompson. Recently I spent a bit of time with Charles Massy up on the Monero talking about the amazing things that he's been doing in terms of holistic grazing and regenerative agriculture. I was really lucky to be able to have a sit down with Charles and have a good discussion with him about some of the regen ag practices and principles that he's put into place and how they can be adopted for smaller acreages. So this is part 2 of the interview that aired a couple of weeks ago, and I really hope that you enjoy the content and enjoy the amazing and fascinating conversation. As always guys, if you like this sort of content, don't forget, hit the little subscribe button down there, give it a thumbs up, and there's plenty more content like this and more on timthompson.ag. Well, thank you very much, mate, for not only taking us around the farm, but also for inviting us back to have a cup of tea around the kitchen table, where all of the world's problems get solved.
That's right, no problem.
It's been fascinating to watch you on a large scale, 2,000 or more acres, taking a system-wide approach to landscape management and seeing the benefits for that over a 30 or 40 year period, not just over 3 or 4 years. Not only in the declining number of pest attacks, but the increased stocking rate that you've experienced over that time and your almost negligible input cost on the property. Do you buy fertiliser anymore?
No, haven't bought it for 30 plus years, I don't think.
One of my friends, who is a very intelligent man and has probably taught me more about tree fruit production than anyone I know, has very much a systems-based box-type theory about farms and production. And I'm interested in how those sort of people can be spoken to in a way that they can understand and perceive what you're doing here. His argument is basically that we've got a box, this is our land, it's got a set capacity, we take out X number of tonnes every year from that box, and he was an incredibly successful man. He's growing 100 tonnes a hectare of fruit, supplying major supermarkets and all the rest of it. And his argument was, if I'm taking that production out, which I need to take out to be in the market, I'm taking out magnesium, manganese, boron, all of those micronutrients. He said he gets nitrogen, he understands nitrogen, he understands it's in the atmosphere, it can be converted. But he said the stumbling block that he has and the problem that he has with regenerative agriculture or any of the brands of approaches that people sell is that where are those micronutrients that are leaving the farm going to come from? Now, I'm suspecting that you're going to argue that that's a problem with the perception of the farm being a box, a sealed box. What would you say to a gentleman like that? He's an intelligent man, but he finds this to be the major stumbling block. Inputs don't match outputs in his schema.
Totally understand where he's coming from. What's missing in that box view is the role of living biology.
Yep.
So, let's look at a rainforest. A good friend of mine, Walter Yona, was in the top CSIRO soil team decades ago when they worked all their way up through Queensland, and they looked at rainforests on Fraser Island. Essentially beach sand, no nutrients. And yet year after year that rainforest was full production, birds and other things taking off produce, rain washing it out, and yet the whole thing was richly maintained in full production without any diminution. And so what's behind it is the role of biology in the soil, particularly microhazal fungi. Look, it's the fruits. I bet this guy's a pretty good scientist.
He is. He's very good.
Yeah. So it's the fruits of the mechanistic mind, with all the wonders that have come from good science.
Yeah.
But where it hits the wall, so to speak, in theory terms, is the totally fluid, holistic, lateral function of biology entering that system. And you can't anticipate it because it's going to be different in every soil for different situations, etc., etc. But that's why biology is the key driver in all regenerative ag. And the minute we overgraze or start poisoning the biology, you've got a failed system that therefore does need top-ups of industrial chemicals, and that is not sustainable and kills more and more biology the whole time. So you're sort of on this treadmill towards drug addiction, if you like, because the very driver's being killed all the time. Whether it's your cereals and other things, pre-domestication of plants, and then from Western agriculture's point of view in the Middle East, the cereals and everything else were small weedy components, annual weeds, in healthy grasslands that are grazed by ruminants. They're so co-evolved and adapted that many annual plants in that system will be stimulated by animal saliva to propagate and regenerate. So that's how tight that interaction is. And the modern regenerative cropping, which is yielding pretty impressive yields, has animals in the system. Once you have well-grazed grasslands and shrublands, you've got deep roots accessing more nutrients, and the biology is doing that, healthy soil biology. You've got critters going down a long way, and we know from regenerative grazing in the American prairies that the depth of those critters, once you've got your healthy grazing working, they're starting to find species appearing that they wonder where in the hell they've come from, but it's stored seed down very deep. It's being brought out by some of the burrowing critters and stuff. So the difference to the box theory, which is more modern physics and chemistry, the chemistry in many ways, having done it at 101 at uni, is very limiting because it totally ignores the real driver of the system, which is an active biology.
I did soil tests at my place recently, and they said, oh, your phosphorus is so far below what it should be, and that which is there is unavailable. For a regenerative approach, would you start with a phosphorus top-up to get you going, or would there be other ways that you would go about regenerating that landscape? Because I certainly went for an organic fertiliser source of phosphorus just to top me up and get me going.
Yeah, look, if it's an organic source,
Yep.
It's not going to do harm. No problem with, in a moderate form, getting it on would be my advice. But nature's unbelievably wise if we work with her. And I've seen lots of examples now. Yeah, you can go to your traditional soil laboratory and get your Olsen P measurements on phosphorus down at whatever it is, and your pH is sitting at only 4.5 or something, and it frightens the shit out of you. So you're going to have to top all this stuff up. But there's so many examples now. If you work with natural ingredients and just let nature do the work, the biology, pH problem self-corrects towards neutral anyway, because nature's getting it all balanced of her own accord. By pouring on the industrial chemicals, we're just interfering with the natural function.
And your work through ANU and other organisations that you've worked with over a long period of time now, you've found a lot of people that are actually viable commercial farmers that are using regenerative agriculture as a way of managing their landscape.
Both cropping and grazing, and more efficient in many respects. I used to have probably, when I had a merino stud, I'd have 20 odd different mobs of sheep for mating, and different grades of studs and flocks and all that sort of stuff. Now we've essentially got one, and so I'm moving them every few days, but compared to having set stocked 20 odd mobs which have to be attended, I've eliminated a lot of labour in doing that, but we're using that labour. We haven't eliminated that labour unit. It's being used in more productive areas, painting trees and other stuff to do with lifestyle or whatever, but it's still focused on a bit of farm production, etc., etc. So it's more efficient in every respect, and you're working with the animal's natural inclination rather than forcing him to eat lower and lower values of feed and lower grades and start pushing the fences and getting diseases and all the rest of it. I mean, on this place, the elimination of drenching, there's some years I've never drenched. Some years you get caught, like last year, which was quite exceptional.
You had bad barber's pole?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, everyone did, that's why I asked about that.
Yeah, so you've got to be honest about it. But
Yeah.
we still probably only drenched twice for the
Right.
year, whereas I know, Western Victoria and stuff, it's nearly monthly happened.
Mm.
In fact, I remember as a new graduate coming home and the Department of Ag guy grabbing me and said, Merksharp and Dome, I think was the company, here's a free holiday for you over to Hamilton, Western Victoria. You can have 4 days paid in a nice motel. And I think it was Merksharp, one of those big companies. They just basically sold that we had to drench every month if you're going to survive. That was the 4 days of a few farm visits and all the theory behind why we had to drench so much. So yeah, you've got to look for the motives of what drives the system, and we're talking about the biggest multinationals in the world. They're very skilled at arguing why we need them. But well-run nature, you survive pretty well without them.
Just doesn't have a publicity department or nice brochures. Now, my next question I think is quite close to my heart and quite close to a number of viewers. And that is that we've seen the amazing job that you've done with a whole ecological system. We've got, from the mountaintops down to the creek, you have total control of this.
Well, not total, nature's got total control, I'm just helping it.
My apologies.
Yeah.
But you've got the ability to manage that landscape entirely from the start to the finish of the water cycle there. For someone like myself with 5, 10, 15, 20 acres who's just wanting to do their little bit, they're not looking for necessarily a commercial return. Their farm plan might be to support their lifestyle and have a few nice sheep that they go down and pat in the morning. It might be as a base for their other jobs, or it might be to return a small amount of farm income that pays the rates every year. What are the low-lying fruit that can easily be picked off to make your farm more regenerative and less dependent on chemical and mechanical interventions?
You're full of all the easy questions today.
I am, aren't I? I'm making your life easy for you. But I mean, we can't, obviously, if our neighbour has the key line on their property, we can't necessarily plough the key line or put trees on the key line. Yeah. If there's a road below us, we might have limitations as to how wide we can make the vegetation border. There are all these little limitations that come with smaller properties that you don't face on a large one. So what are the big take-homes that people with small properties can do today to get an immediate benefit from?
I sort of start by looking at the sort of 5 factors that drive a healthy ecology and then identify the weakest link. It's one way of doing it. So everything starts with the solar cycle.
So keeping the ground covered?
Well, getting as much green on the country as you can without flogging country in. Photosynthesis puts sugars in the soil, feeds the biology. So biology is number 2. This is not necessarily in any order.
Yep. So it doesn't matter where that green's coming from, does it? I could be planting peas, I could be planting corn.
And if it's a weed that's going to disappear in time, don't get hung up because it's a dreaded weed. It's probably punching a hole in the soil to relieve compaction and identifying nutrients and bringing them up,
Yep.
So everything has to start with the solar, and then from that, in any particular order, but obviously the soil mineral cycle, the biology, is critical, relates to the sugars in the soil and the biology.
And that goes back to our first discussion that we've had around this kitchen table, wasn't it? Is that the soil biology drives the mineral cycle, not the other way around.
That's right, and that's your third. It's the mineral cycle. 4th is biodiversity, your shrubs and grasses and all the rest of it, and insects and birds and the whole thing.
Yep.
So if you identify on your acres what's most at risk, which is most likely, if it's small, it'll be compacted soil, and weeds probably, if you've got small blocks that are being bought. The only thing that's going to fix the compaction isn't a huge mechanical intervention and heavy tractors and deep ripping. It's going to be deep-rooted perennials and particularly forbs, the forage species that will really punch a hole down.
Things like tree lucerne, things like that.
Tree lucerne, but also some of the brassicas and those sorts of guys, and some of the big sort of radish type.
Pasture radishes.
Those sort of guys, would almost crack concrete. Nature will solve the problems, so if it's compaction, put in your big root punching type fellas. So you want green cover for as long as you can throughout the year, putting those sugars in the soil to get your biology going. The biology is ultimately the secret. And it's what accesses the nutrients and brings them up into the plant, which the animals can get, or is in the food, etc., etc. And you get all that right, well then you've got your soil water cycle is hugely impacted because...
now, if you're not in control of the watershed, if you're not in control from the top to the bottom,
yeah.
on a small property, what would be some tips to help with the water cycle?
Depends if the problem is a big wash of water coming off country in storms because it's compacted above you or trashed or whatever. Then you'd have to think about alleviating that flow or catching it. But the big secret is through deep-rooted plants, opening up the soil depth, you're going to trap more of your effective rainfall. I mean, it's black and white when you see it achieved. I've seen country around the traps that in a drought gets an inch of rain and only about 20% sticks.
Small acreages often stumble with is their stocking.
Yeah.
A lot of people will say, I've got 10 acres, I want to buy 3 or 4 cows. And they don't realise that those cows, yes, 10 acres can easily, in most country, cover 3 or 4 cows when you're looking at hundreds of acres. But when you're looking at a small property where there's no period of rest, your property starts to decline and decline and decline and decline. So smaller land holdings should look at smaller animals, at smaller stocking rates, so that they can provide that rest to keep the green cover on, to keep the deep-rooted plants going, to keep the water and mineral cycle moving.
Yeah, that's certainly one way of approaching it. It is the conundrum of if you want to have animals. So you either go small or you work out a system between neighbours where you can collectively reduce and still have some rotational going or something. But
yep.
It is a trap, and you've either got to make a decision, well, I'm going to have a country that's a bit degraded, but I will put up with that because we've got these cuddly animals, or let's think laterally and work something else out. Which can mean putting them in a more intensive system and feeding them through that situation too, but that's costly as well. The regeneratively grazed property had kept selling down their stock to match livestock to rainfall and cover until they're only left with a couple of hundred sheep and the rest of them were adjusted. The other place was set stock and it was just dust bowl. That was in June. And that's right, the drought broke in July that year. At the 10% level of that rain, only sort of 10 mils in, the place that had been flogged and was dusty was already flowing muddy water. It couldn't hold any more water. The place that had been managed, keeping the depth of the soil, the root pores and the biology still living, at the end of the 4 inches ran nothing. And at the end of the 4 inches, the place that started running at 10% in was just still pouring mud. The dams were full of mud and shit. So the point I'm making, across the fence, one place through regenerative management, at the breaking of a drought when you want it, captured 100%, the other place only captured 10 or 15. It's just chalk and cheese, you know, having as much green as you can throughout the year, and getting your soil mineral through the biology in balance, getting the water cycle in balance, and with that came biodiversity. And the biodiversity kicks in when you then get into the summer, etc., etc., and you've got all that growth. You've got pest control and all the rest of it, rather than a monoculture. It has to be sprayed and protected from, because it's got no pest protection, biological systems in place.
Charles, thank you very much. There's never enough time when I interview someone like yourself. I appreciate you taking the time and having us on your property to chat about this. I'm sure it won't convince everyone, but like you said, most people that adopt regenerative ag do so when their back's to the wall and they've got no other option, and then they wake up one morning and think, why didn't I do this earlier? It would be lovely if people that were doing well using the system that they're using were able to think about other ways of doing things, but that's not necessarily the human way, is it?
No, it's not, but look, well done for throwing some new ideas into everyone's thinking. I mean, I think we've all been in that modern industrial system and those paradigms are very deep and very strongly held, and there's sort of all sorts of psychological reasons for that. But if we're going to get ourselves out of the climate crisis, we haven't even touched on those issues, the role that regen ag can play.
Locking up soil carbon, pulling it out of the atmosphere.
Yeah, well look, I've been privileged to work with Paul Hawken, who edited the book Drawdown, 100 scientists looking at the best methods to draw down carbon dioxide, and become friends with Paul, and the top 24 best methods, half of them were regen ag. You call that 12 regen ag, it's number one, pulling down carbon dioxide. And the recent research from Princeton University, commissioned by the US government on carbon drawdown, they conclude in the fifth part that regen ag has the best solution. So this is a no-brainer, and I'm sure there's going to be some rewards coming into that down the track for different sorts of mechanisms. But the other aspect of all that is what regen ag does for how do I say it, deflecting the modern health crisis of modern diseases, because a lot of it's due to unhealthy food, not just the chemicals that are in it, but because of industrial ag, the nutrients that aren't in it.
Charles, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed this sort of video. If you do, please hit the subscribe button, thumbs up, and there's plenty more content on timthompson.ag. Would you be prepared to write me a small blog?
I will in time, not immediately, but yeah, I'm too happy, and look, keep up the good work. This is the sort of stuff that's going to access more and more people.
Well, hopefully we've done a good enough job today that I can come back and annoy you in the future, and maybe some viewers might have some questions that they can put in the comments section, and I can throw those at you from time to time when we get a good one.
No problem.